Welcome to my channel, The World of Science Fiction. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. The air in the processing corridor of Tartarus, 7 tasted of ozone and recycled desperation. Kale knew the flavor well. It was the same on every corporate penal colony from here to the Kepler Verge. It was the taste of lives being ground down into profit margins, of hope being systematically extracted like rare earth metals from stubborn rock. He leaned against a bulkhead plated with grime-caked durasteel, the low-frequency thrum of the moon's atmospheric processors vibrating through the soles of his worn boots and up into his bones. It was a constant, oppressive hum that promised only another cycle, another shift, another meaningless rotation in the void. His title was Handler, a sanitized term for a glorified zookeeper whose charges were sentient beings. He had once been a soldier, a sergeant in the Outer Rim conflicts, fighting for ideals that had long since evaporated under the harsh glare of corporate expansion. Now, his battles were smaller, pettier, and infinitely more soul-crushing. He managed the flow of inmates to the deep core mines, ensured nutrient-paste dispensers were functional, and broke up fights born of claustrophobia and futility. Most importantly, he kept his head down and collected his credits. Survival was a simpler, cleaner motive than patriotism. A harsh klaxon blared, its metallic screech cutting through the ambient drone. Red lights strobed across the corridor, painting the gray walls in rhythmic pulses of blood and shadow. It was time. Kale pushed himself off the wall, his movements economical and devoid of any wasted energy. He adjusted the stun baton clipped to his belt, a useless reflex. The tool was for inmates, not for the asset he was about to escort. He keyed in his access code at the reinforced plasteel door marked Containment Base Sigma. The door hissed open, revealing not a cell, but a chamber. It was chilled to a precise temperature, the air scrubbed clean of the station's usual taint. In the center, suspended in a stasis field that shimmered like heat haze, was the champion. The corporation called it Specimen 734. The inmates, in hushed and fearful whispers, called it the Shard. Kale just thought of it as her. She was a being unlike any he had ever seen, even in the alien-choked war zones of his past. Her form was vaguely humanoid, tall and slender, but composed of something that looked like living, breathing crystal. Light didn't just reflect off her surface. It was drawn in, refracted, and pulsed out in slow, hypnotic waves of soft blues and violets. She was beauty and terror in equal measure, a living geode of impossible power. They had found her deep within the moon during the initial excavations, dormant in a cavern of monolithic crystals. When their mining lasers had disturbed her slumber, she had awakened. The initial reports were classified, but the casualty logs told the story. She was a force of nature, and the corporation, in its infinite avarice, had found a way to weaponize her. They had built an arena, the Crucible, and she was its undefeated queen. Her victories quelled dissent among the prison population far more effectively than any number of guards. Fear was the ultimate tool of control. Kale's job was simple: escort her from containment to the arena's ready room. He walked to the control panel, his footsteps echoing in the sterile silence. He initiated the sequence to transfer the stasis field to a mobile emitter sled. The hum intensified, and the shimmering field detached from the ceiling and floor projectors, coalescing around the crystalline figure. Heavy magnetic shackles, thick bands of dull gray metal, were clamped onto her wrists and ankles, not for restraint. The stasis field handled that, but for psychological effect. They were a reminder of who was in charge. As the sled activated, hovering a few inches off the deck, Kale saw it. One of the magnetic clamps on her left wrist was misaligned. Its edge was digging into the delicate, crystalline structure of her arm. A network of fine, hair-like fractures, almost invisible, was spreading from the point of contact. It was a small thing, a detail no one else would notice or care about. She was a thing, an asset, a monster. Its comfort was irrelevant. He looked at her face, a smooth, featureless plane that still somehow conveyed a sense of profound stillness. There was no sound, no expression, but he felt something radiating from her, a low thrum of distress, a silent scream that resonated not in his ears, but in the hollow space in his chest where his own empathy had gone to die. He thought of the protocols. He thought of Warden Valerius and his cold, reptilian eyes. He thought of his paycheck, the only thing tethering him to a future of any kind. He ignored them all. With a quick, practiced movement, Kale stepped forward and keyed a command into the shackle's control stud. The clamp hissed open a few millimeters. He carefully adjusted it, his gloved fingers brushing against her cool, smooth surface. It felt like polished stone and living tissue all at once. The fine fractures ceased their spread. The silent screaming in his chest subsided. He stepped back, his heart hammering against his ribs. It was a foolish, sentimental act. A transgression born of a ghost of the man he used to be. The champion did not move, but the light pulsing from within her form shifted. For a fleeting second, the cool blues and violets were replaced by a soft, warm amber. It was a light that felt like gratitude. It was a light that felt like a connection. It was the moment everything changed. He guided the sled out into the corridor, the red lights still flashing their urgent, rhythmic warning. He did not notice the security camera in the corner of the containment bay tracking his every move. He did not notice the cold, predatory eyes of Crix, the warden's zealous lieutenant, watching the feed from the security nexus. He only felt the faint warmth of that amber light, a spark in the cold, gray dark of Tartarus. 7. The walk to the crucible was a study in contrasts. The sterile, functional corridors of the command sector gave way to the raw, unfinished rock of the prison levels. The air grew thick with the stench of unwashed bodies and metallic dust. Faces, gaunt and etched with grime, watched from behind the energy barriers of their cell blocks. Their eyes held a mixture of fear and morbid excitement. The champion's procession was a grim holiday. It meant a spectacle. It meant, for a short while, the violence was happening to someone else. Kale kept his gaze fixed forward, his hand resting on the sled's guidance rail. He could feel the slight vibration of her crystalline body through the metal frame, a quiet hum that was entirely different from the station's oppressive drone. It was a living frequency. He wondered what she thought, if she thought at all in a way a human could comprehend. Was she aware of her role in this brutal theater? Did she feel the hate and fear directed at her from the hundreds of prisoners she was used to intimidate? They reached the massive blast doors of the arena prep area. Crix was waiting for them, flanked by two heavily armed enforcers. Crix was a man carved from granite and spite, his face a permanent sneer. He was a true believer in the corporate doctrine of order through force, and he held a special contempt for former soldiers like Kale, whom he saw as sellswords with no true loyalty. "Handler," Crix said, his voice a low growl. He didn't look at Kale, his eyes were fixed on the shard. "The warden wants a clean performance today. No complications." Kale gave a curt nod. "There never are." Crix's gaze finally shifted, locking onto Kale. His eyes were small and dark, like chips of obsidian. "The warden reviews all security logs. He values protocol. He dislikes deviations." The emphasis was subtle, but the threat was as clear as the polished durasteel of the enforcer's armor. So he had seen. The knowledge settled in Kale's stomach like a block of ice. His small act of compassion had been noted, filed, and would be used against him. On a station like Tartarus, 7, any action outside of prescribed duties was viewed as a potential symptom of insubordination, a crack in the perfect edifice of control. "My only deviation is ensuring the asset is delivered in operational condition," Kale replied, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. He had learned long ago that showing any feeling to men like Crix was like showing blood to a predator. Crix smiled, a thin, cruel slash across his face. "Of course. Deliver the asset." He stepped aside, and the blast doors ground open. The prep chamber was a circular room, stark and functional. Medical technicians and equipment handlers scurried about, their faces tense. Kale guided the sled to the central platform. The process from here was automated. The mobile stasis field would be deactivated, and the arena's own containment field would engage, trapping her on the circular sand-covered floor until her opponents were released. As the technicians began their work, Kale stepped back, his duty technically complete. He was supposed to return to his post, but he lingered, watching as they removed the magnetic shackles. When they removed the one he had adjusted, he saw it. On the inner surface of her crystalline wrist, where the pressure had been, the light was different. A faint, glowing amber symbol had appeared, like a circuit trace etched in light. It was a character from no language he knew, intricate and beautiful. It pulsed once, a soft, silent beat, before fading back into the shimmering blue. A message, a mark, acknowledgement. The general alarm suddenly changed its tone, shifting from the arena announcement to a station-wide alert. It was a harsher, more frantic sound. Crix's comlink crackled. He listened, his sneer deepening into a mask of grim satisfaction. "Handler Kale," Crix said, turning to face him fully. "By order of Warden Valerius, you are relieved of duty." The two enforcers raised their pulse rifles, the muzzles aimed squarely at Kale's chest. "Your next assignment is in the Crucible. Effective immediately." Kale didn't react. He had known this was a possibility the moment he saw Crix. The Warden was making an example of him. Any hint of sympathy for the champion was a weakness to be purged. He would be the opposition today, a lone man against the Shard. It wasn't an execution, it was a piece of theater. The handler who dared to touch the monster, devoured by his charge. A neat, tidy lesson for the entire prison population. "Strip him," Crix commanded. The enforcers moved in, efficiently removing his baton, his sidearm, his utility belt. They left him in his simple gray jumpsuit. The rules of the Crucible are clear. No weapons. Kale's mind raced. This was it. The end of a long, ignoble road. He had survived corporate wars and back-alley ambushes, only to die as a prop in a prison warden's power play. But as they pushed him towards the ramp leading down to the arena floor, his eyes fell on a pile of discarded equipment near the wall. Among the empty crates and used power cells was a coil of high-tensile utility rope, the kind used by maintenance crews. It was a tool, not a weapon. An idea sparked in the darkness. A desperate, insane plan. It was less a plan for survival and more a final act of defiance. "Wait," Kale said, his voice steady. The enforcers paused. Crix raised an eyebrow. "I have a right to personal effects," Kale stated, reciting a line from the corporate penal code he'd had to memorize. Article 7, Paragraph 3. One non-restricted personal item is permitted. Crix laughed, a harsh, barking sound. "You want to bring a good luck charm? A photo of your mommy." "I want the rope," Kale said, nodding towards the coil. The enforcers looked to Crix, who considered it for a moment. A man with a rope against the Shard. The absurdity was appealing. It would make the show even more pathetic, even more instructive. "Give it to him," Crix sneered. "Let's see what kind of noose he can tie for himself." One of the enforcers tossed the rope at Kale's feet. It was about 30 meters long, thin but incredibly strong. He picked it up, coiling it neatly over his shoulder. He felt its weight, its potential. It wasn't a weapon. It was a key. He walked down the ramp, the heavy gate clanging shut behind him. The roar of the crowd, 1,000 inmates packed into the viewing galleries carved from the rock, washed over him. He stepped onto the coarse, red sand of the arena floor. The air was hot and still. High above, the bright, sterile lights of the arena beat down, bleaching all color from the world. Across the sand, on her central platform, the Shard stood motionless. The mobile stasis field was gone, replaced by the shimmering, invisible wall of the arena's containment field. She was free to move within its circular boundary. The light within her was a turbulent, stormy violet. Kale took a deep breath. He was not here to fight her. He was here to free her. The plan was born of his intimate knowledge of this place. He had studied the schematics, overseen repairs. The arena wasn't just a pit, it was a machine. The containment field was projected from a series of emitters embedded in the arena wall, just below the viewing galleries. They were shielded, of course, but their power conduits ran through maintenance access panels higher up the wall. Those panels were unshielded. If he could reach them, if he could short out the relays, he could bring the field down. A deep, resonant bell tolled, signaling the start of the contest. The crowd roared. From the central platform, the Shard moved. She didn't walk. She glided, her crystalline feet barely disturbing the sand. She moved towards him with a terrifying, inexorable grace. The violet light within her intensified, and the air around her began to crackle with latent energy. Kale didn't run from her. He ran towards the wall. He quickly fashioned a loop at one end of the rope, a makeshift harness for his foot. He needed to get up the wall, 20 meters of sheer, smooth durasteel. But he had noticed something on his many trips here. The laser cannons used for disposing of the dead after a match left small, slag pockmarks in the wall. They were tiny, but they might be enough. He uncoiled the rest of the rope, tying a heavy, complex knot at the other end, turning it into a weighted grapple. The shard was closing the distance. He could feel the static charge in the air, raising the hair on his arms. He had seconds. He swung the weighted end of the rope, once, twice, building momentum. He aimed for a dark scar of melted metal high above. He let it fly. The knot sailed through the air, a perfect arc, and struck the wall. It didn't catch. It fell back, useless. The shard was almost upon him. She raised a hand, and the air in front of her shimmered. A lance of pure force, visible only as a distortion in the air, shot past his head, striking the wall behind him with a deafening crack. The durasteel glowed cherry red where it hit. He didn't hesitate. He swung the rope again, desperately, putting all his strength into it. This time it snagged. The knot caught in the lip of a larger pockmark. He yanked on it, testing the hold. It felt solid. He put his boot in the loop and began to climb, hand over hand, his muscles screaming in protest. He was an exposed target, a slow-moving fly on a wall. Below him, the shard paused. She could have blasted him off the wall in an instant. But she didn't. She tilted her featureless head, and the light within her flickered. Was it confusion? Or was it recognition? Did she remember the man who had shown her a moment's kindness? From the command booth high above, Crix's voice boomed over the arena's loudspeakers, laced with fury. What is he doing? Kill him. Finish him. The shard seemed to ignore the command. She watched him, her stormy violet light softening almost imperceptibly. Kale kept climbing. 10 meters. 15. He could feel the heat from the overhead lights on his back. His lungs burned. The shouts from the crowd and Crix's enraged commands faded into a dull roar. His entire world was the rope, the wall, and the panel just a few meters above him. He reached the access panel, a simple rectangular plate held in place by 4 magnetic bolts. He clung to the rope with one hand, his body pressed flat against the wall. With his other hand, he fumbled with the panel's release latch. It was stiff, rusted from neglect. Suddenly, a volley of pulse rounds stitched a line across the wall next to him. Sparks rained down. It wasn't the shard. It was the enforcers in the gallery, firing on Crix's orders. They were breaking the arena's most sacred rule. The crowd erupted in a chaotic mix of jeers and panic. This was no longer a controlled spectacle. This was a breakdown of order. Another pulse round struck the wall, dangerously close to his hand. He gritted his teeth and pulled harder on the latch. It gave with a groan of tortured metal. The panel swung open, revealing a tangle of thick, glowing power conduits. This was the main relay for this section of the field. He had no tool to short it out. But he had the rope. And he had a plan. He looked down. The shard was directly below him, looking up. The enforcers were taking aim again. He saw their rifles leveled not at him, but at her. They had decided to neutralize the asset. In that split second, a choice was made. Not by him, but by her. A wave of brilliant, blue energy erupted from her body, not a destructive blast, but a shield. It formed a shimmering dome around the base of the wall, intercepting the pulse rounds. They sizzled and dissipated against the barrier, harmless. She was protecting him. The first act of mutual protection. It was all the confirmation he needed. He worked fast, unlooping the weighted end of his rope. He swung it into the open panel, wrapping it around the primary conduit. He then fed the other end of the rope through a maintenance hook on the wall and pulled it taut, creating a simple, effective pulley. He clipped the weighted end to his belt. The final piece of his plan was insane. He took a deep breath and let go of the rope he was holding. He fell. For a heart-stopping second, he was in freefall. Then the rope snapped taut. His body weight, channeled through the pulley, ripped the conduit from its moorings. A shower of blue-white sparks erupted from the panel. The air filled with the smell of burning electronics. The section of the containment field directly below him flickered and died. He hit the sand hard, the impact jarring every bone in his body. He lay there, gasping for air, the world spinning around him. The roar of the crowd was now a sound of pure chaos. Alarms blared across the entire station. A shadow fell over him. He looked up to see the shard standing there. Her protective dome had vanished. A gaping hole, 20 meters wide, now existed in the arena's containment field. Freedom was a few steps away. She extended a crystalline hand. It wasn't a threat. It was an invitation. Kale took her hand. It was cool and impossibly strong. She pulled him to his feet as if he weighed nothing. Together, they ran for the gap in the wall, for the service tunnel that lay beyond. They plunged into the darkness, leaving the light, the noise, and the chaos of the crucible behind. The manhunt had begun. The service tunnels of Tartarus, 7 were a labyrinth of cold, damp metal and raw, weeping rock. The air was thick with the smell of mildew and engine lubricant, a stark contrast to the sterile atmosphere of the upper levels. Emergency lights cast long, distorted shadows that seemed to writhe and twist in their peripheral vision. The distant sounds of alarms and shouted commands echoed through the network of passages, a constant reminder that they were being hunted. Kale led the way, relying on a mental map pieced together from years of trudging through these same corridors on maintenance duty. He moved with a purpose born of desperation, his body aching from the fall, but his mind sharp and clear. Beside him, the being he now thought of as Lyra moved in absolute silence. The light that emanated from her body was now a soft, steady blue, a mobile lantern in the oppressive dark. It cast their elongated shadows ahead of them, 2 unlikely fugitives against a world of steel and stone. Their initial dynamic was one of wary observation. Kale watched her, marveling at the effortless grace of her movement. She was a creature of immense power. He had seen that in the arena. But here, in the tight confines of the tunnels, she seemed almost delicate. She reacted to the environment in ways he couldn't comprehend, her inner light sometimes flickering or changing hue in response to the hum of a distant power conduit or a drip of water from the ceiling. She was an open sensor, taking in a spectrum of information he was blind to. Lyra, in turn, watched him. Her featureless face was impossible to read, yet he felt her gaze on him, analytical and curious. She seemed to be studying the way he tested a loose floor plate, the way he paused to listen to the shifting sounds of their pursuers, the way his breath hitched when a surge of pain shot through his bruised ribs. There was no judgment in her observation, only a deep, quiet focus. They communicated without a single word. When they came to a junction, Kale would pause, and she would subtly shift the intensity of her light, illuminating one passage more than the other. He learned to trust this instinct. Her senses were far more acute than his. She could feel the vibrations of approaching boots through the rock, sense the electrical fields of security drones long before he could hear their whirring rotors. Their first true test came in the abandoned mining sector, Delta 7. The corporation had sealed it off decades ago after the automated drills had broken into a pocket of unstable geology. The air here was stale and heavy with metallic dust. The tunnels were shored up with decaying wooden beams and rusted iron supports. It was a dead end on the station schematics, which was precisely why Kale had chosen it. It was a place no one would willingly go. As they navigated a particularly treacherous passage, the floor groaned under their weight. Kale froze, holding up a hand. Lyra immediately dimmed her light to a barely perceptible glimmer. Ahead, a section of the tunnel had collapsed, leaving a deep, black chasm of unknown depth. The only way across was a single, narrow I-beam, slick with moisture and corrosion. Kale went first. He moved slowly, his arms outstretched for balance, his boots shuffling carefully along the beam. Halfway across, the beam shifted with a loud metallic shriek. It tilted precariously, and Kale lost his footing. He flailed, his fingers scrabbling for a handhold on the slick metal, but found none. He fell, a sharp cry escaping his lips. He didn't hit the bottom. A band of soft, blue light, solid as steel, wrapped around his chest, arresting his fall. He dangled over the abyss, held aloft by Lyra's power. She stood on the edge of the chasm, her arm outstretched, her form glowing with intense concentration. The light was not a rope. It was a tangible extension of her will. Slowly, gently, she lifted him back up and deposited him on the far side of the chasm. He lay on the cold ground for a moment, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He pushed himself up, looking back at her. She stood on the other side, separated by the gulf. Without hesitation, she stepped off the edge. For a moment, she floated, suspended in the darkness by her own power. Then she glided across the chasm, her movement as fluid as water, and landed silently beside him. He looked at her, then at the chasm she had so effortlessly crossed, and then back at her. He gave a single, slow nod. Gratitude. Respect. She responded by briefly brightening her light, a silent acknowledgement. In the shared ordeal of the wasteland, their reliance on one another was becoming an unspoken language. They pushed deeper into the abandoned sector, into the oldest parts of the mine, where the corporate markings gave way to something else entirely. The rough-hewn tunnels opened into vast caverns, and the walls were not dead rock, but were lined with the same crystalline material as Lyra's body, though these were dark and inert. It was like walking through the fossilized skeleton of a colossal beast. In the center of the largest cavern stood a formation unlike the others. It was a pillar of crystal that reached from the floor to the ceiling, wider than any of the tunnels. It was shattered, great fissures running through it, and its core was dark. It radiated a profound sense of wrongness, of a life that had been violently extinguished. Lyra walked towards it, her steps slow and reverent. She placed a hand on its fractured surface, and then Kale's mind was filled with light. It was not a psychic assault, but an opening, a sharing. Images, feelings, and concepts flooded his consciousness, bypassing language entirely. He saw this moon not as a barren rock, but as a vibrant, living world. He saw Lyra's people, the Lumina, not as crystalline monsters, but as beings of pure energy and light, living in a symbiotic relationship with the moon's core. The great crystal pillar was their heart, their nexus, a place of communion. They were gardeners, shepherds of the planet's deep energies. He saw the arrival of the corporate ships, the geode, the prospector, their drills and lasers tearing into the living skin of the moon. He felt the Lumina's confusion, their attempts to communicate, which were met with aggression and violence. He witnessed the shattering of the Nexus, an act of catastrophic desecration that severed the Lumina from their source, casting them into chaos and pain. Most were extinguished, their light fading into nothing. The survivors, like Lyra, were captured, their grief and rage twisted by the corporation into a weapon for their arena. He saw Warden Valerius, younger then, directing the final assault, his face illuminated by the dying light of the Nexus, his expression one of cold, triumphant greed. This wasn't just a prison, it was a conquered world. Valerius wasn't just a warden. He was a butcher and a king sitting on a throne of stolen life. The flood of information receded, leaving Kale breathless and shaking. He leaned against the cavern wall for support, the hidden truth of Tartarus, 7 settling upon him with crushing weight. He had been a cog in a machine of genocide. His cynicism, his disillusionment, it all seemed so small and petty in the face of this colossal crime. He looked at Lyra, who had lowered her hand from the dead Nexus. The light within her was a deep, somber indigo, the color of mourning. He now understood her rage in the arena, her silent suffering in the containment cell. He saw her not as a powerful alien, but as the last princess of a dying kingdom, forced to perform on the grave of her people. He walked over to her, his movement slow. He noticed a long, dark fracture along her side, a wound he hadn't seen before, likely sustained during the escape. It was weeping a faint, dark energy, like smoke. Without thinking, he reached out, his fingers tracing the edges of the crack. As his bare skin made contact with her crystalline form, another connection sparked between them. This time, it was she who saw into him. She saw the battlefields of the Outer Rim, the flash of plasma fire, the friends he had lost. She felt the searing heat of the blast that had left a network of jagged scars across his back, scars he kept hidden under his jumpsuit. She felt the cold, hollow ache of his survival, the guilt and the weariness that had been his constant companions for a decade. She saw his scars, and he saw hers. In the silent, dead heart of her world, a bond was forged. It was a connection built not on words or promises, but on a shared, profound understanding of pain and loss. He was no longer just a handler, and she was no longer just an asset. They were survivors. And for the first time in a very long time, Kale felt a flicker of something he had thought long dead. A cause. The hunt intensified. Valerius, enraged by the chaos in the crucible and the escape of his prized asset, had locked down the entire facility. Elite enforcer squads, clad in black carapace armor and armed with military-grade pulse rifles, swept through the tunnel networks. They moved with a ruthless efficiency that the regular prison guards lacked. They were led by Crix, whose personal vendetta against Kale had now merged with his warden's fury. Kale and Lyra were forced to keep moving, retreating deeper into the unstable, forgotten sectors of the moon mine. The shared knowledge of the Lumina's past had changed everything. Kale was no longer just running for his life. He was protecting the last remnant of a murdered people. His military training, long dormant, resurfaced. He began to think in terms of tactics, choke points, and lines of retreat. They set up a temporary refuge in an old ore processing chamber, a vast cavern filled with the rusted hulks of ancient machinery. It offered dozens of hiding places and multiple escape routes. While Kale scouted the perimeter, Lyra rested. The fracture in her side was getting worse, the dark energy seeping from it more quickly. Her light, once so vibrant, was now noticeably dimmer. Her power had limits, and she had expended too much during the escape and in protecting him. "You need to conserve your strength," he said, his voice quiet in the echoing space. It was the first time he had spoken to her as a person, not an object. She responded not with a flash of light, but by projecting a simple image into his mind. A picture of the Enforcer squads, their black armor shining, their rifles at the ready. The message was clear. There was no time to rest. They were coming. He was right. A sudden burst of static from a nearby comm relay, a carelessly opened channel, alerted Kale to their presence. Crix's voice, sharp and angry, cut through the air. "Sector Delta, 9 is clear. They must have gone deeper. Sweep the old processing hub. I want the handler alive. The asset is expendable." Kale's blood ran cold. Expendable. Valerius was willing to lose his champion, his tool of fear, to recapture the man who had defied him. It was no longer about profit. It was about power. It was about making an example of him so absolute that no one would ever dream of disobeying again. He grabbed a heavy steel pipe from the floor, the closest thing he had to a weapon. "We have to move," he whispered, turning to Lyra. But it was too late. Two squads of enforcers entered the chamber from opposite ends, their helmet-mounted lights cutting through the gloom. They were trapped. Crix strode into the center of the chamber, his pulse rifle held casually. "Nowhere left to run, Kale," he called out, his voice amplified by his helmet's external speaker. "You should have stayed a good little dog. The warden might have let you live out your pathetic contract." Kale pushed Lyra behind a massive piece of rusted machinery. "Stay back," he mouthed. He knew he was no match for a dozen armed enforcers, but he would not let them take her. The enforcers advanced, forming a closing circle. Kale stood his ground, the steel pipe held like a quarterstaff. It was a futile gesture, a final, meaningless act of defiance. Just as Crix gave the signal to fire, Lyra moved. She didn't glide forward. She exploded. A shock wave of pure concussive force, colorless and silent, erupted from her body. It slammed into the enforcers, tossing them like dolls against the machinery and rock walls. Armor dented, rifle scattered. The air thrummed with the raw power she had unleashed. Crix, better prepared, had braced himself. He staggered but remained on his feet. He raised his rifle and fired a single, precise shot. The bolt of plasma wasn't aimed at Kale. It struck Lyra directly in her wounded side. She didn't cry out, but her light flickered violently, almost extinguishing completely. She crumpled to the ground, her crystalline form shuddering. The dark energy now poured from her wound like blood. Kale roared, a sound of pure, primal fury. He charged Crix, swinging the pipe with all his might. Crix, surprised by his speed, barely managed to parry the blow with his rifle. The impact sent vibrations jarring up Kale's arms. They engaged in a brutal, desperate dance. Kale's raw fury against Crix's cold, disciplined skill. But the fight was short-lived. The other enforcers were recovering. Kale knew they had only seconds. He feinted a swing at Crix's head, then drove the end of the pipe into his knee. Bone crunched. Crix yelled in pain and surprise, his leg buckling. Kale didn't press the attack. He scooped up the grievously injured Lyra, her body surprisingly light, and ran for the only clear exit, a dark shaft leading down into the deeper mines. Pulse rounds seared the air around them as they disappeared into the blackness. They found a temporary sanctuary in a small, dry cavern, far from the main tunnels. He gently laid her down. Her light was now a faint, throbbing pulse, like a dying star. The wound in her side was a gaping maw of darkness. He sat beside her, helpless. He had no medical supplies, no way to fix something that wasn't flesh and blood. He had led her to this. His defiance had only brought her more pain. The futility of their struggle crashed down on him. They could not win. They could run and hide, but Valerius controlled the moon. He had the soldiers, the weapons, the technology. They had nothing. It was an unwinnable war. As if sensing his despair, Lyra reached out and touched his hand. Another wave of images filled his mind, but these were different. They were not memories, but schematics, energy patterns, a solution. She showed him the shattered nexus again. She showed him the unstable core of the moon, which the corporation's reckless mining had pushed to a critical state. And she showed him Valerius, back in the command center, initiating a final, terrifying protocol. He was preparing to vent the moon's core energy directly into the mine shafts. A sterilization, it would overload and destroy everything. The mines, the prison, the remaining inert crystals of her people, and any evidence of his crimes. It was the ultimate scorched earth policy. Then, she showed him the impossible choice. The nexus could be healed. Its connection to the core could be re-established, stabilizing it, and calming the moon's violent energies. The sterilization protocol would be rendered inert. But the shattered crystal could no longer regulate the flow on its own. It needed a conduit, a bridge, a consciousness to guide the immense energies. An organic mind, with its capacity for complex, nuanced thought, was the only thing that could weave the broken threads back together. The being who did this would have to merge with the nexus, their consciousness becoming the new, living heart of the moon. They would save the Lumina, stop Valerius, and bring peace to this tortured world. But their physical body would be consumed. Their identity, their very self, would be subsumed into an eternal, silent guardianship. It was a sacrifice of a scale he could barely comprehend. Not just a death, but a complete transformation into something other. The image faded, leaving the choice hanging in the silent darkness of the cavern between them. The impossible solution to an unwinnable war. The silence in the cavern was absolute, broken only by the faint, rhythmic pulse of Lyra's fading light. Kale sat on the cold stone floor, the weight of the revelation pressing down on him. It was not a choice between victory and defeat, but between annihilation and a sacrifice that was tantamount to oblivion. He looked at his hands, calloused and scarred from a lifetime of fighting other people's wars for other people's reasons. He had always been a tool, a soldier for the hegemony, a handler for the corporation. His life had been a series of contracts, of duties performed without passion or belief. He looked at Lyra. Her weakened form was a testament to the brutality of the system he had served. She was the last ember of a vibrant civilization, and Valerius was about to stamp it out for good, simply to cover his tracks. All his cynicism, all the walls he had built around himself, seemed like childish vanities in the face of such absolute malice. What was he saving himself for? A few more years of tasteless nutrient paste and recycled air? A retirement on some smog-choked orbital station, haunted by the ghosts of his past? His life was an empty vessel. Here, before him, was a chance to fill it, just once, with something of infinite meaning. To defy the purposelessness that had defined him. To fight not for a paycheck or for survival, but for a people, for a world, for a sliver of atonement. He wrestled with the decision, but the conflict was surprisingly brief. The man he was, the jaded veteran named Kale, was already a ghost. He had died a little in every battle, in every compromise, in every act of turning a blind eye. Perhaps this was not an end, but the only authentic act he had left. A final, meaningful deployment. He made his decision. There were no grand speeches, no tearful farewells. The gravity of the moment was too immense for words. He simply reached out and gently placed his hand over her wound. He didn't try to fix it. He just offered a moment of shared stillness, of comfort. He met her unseen gaze, and in the depths of his own mind, he formed a single, clear thought. I will do it. Lyra's light, which had been a dim, wounded violet, shifted. A soft, brilliant white bloomed from her core, a color of profound sorrow and immense respect. It washed over him, a silent acceptance of his vow. She projected one final, powerful image into his mind, a detailed map of the tunnels leading from their position back to the central command spire, the very heart of the facility. It was the quickest, most direct route. It was also the most heavily guarded. At the center of the spire, directly below the warden's throne-like command chair, was the primary access conduit to the Nexus chamber. That was their destination. The commitment was made. A silent, solemn pact between a dying soldier and a dying star. With a surge of will, Lyra's light intensified. The borrowed strength seemed to flow from her resolve. She rose, her movements stiff but steady. Cale got to his feet, picking up the steel pipe that was his only weapon. They shared one last look. It was time to go back. It was time to finish the war. They moved with a desperate urgency, a single organism of flesh and light driven by a singular purpose. The journey back was a blur of brutal, close-quarters combat. Lyra used her remaining energy in precise, tactical bursts, a concussive wave to disable a security drone, a flash of blinding light to disorient a patrol. Cale fought with the ferocity of a man with nothing left to lose, his pipe a blur of motion, breaking limbs and denting helmets. They were a whirlwind of defiance, cutting a swath through Valerius's defenses. They finally reached the base of the command spire, a massive column of polished black metal that rose through the central cavern of the facility. The final confrontation awaited them at its peak. The ascent to the command center was a vertical battle. They fought their way up service ladders and emergency stairwells, past barricades and automated sentry guns. Alarms shrieked a constant, frantic rhythm, the station's mechanical death cry. Cale's body was a canvas of new bruises and cuts, and Lyra's light dimmed with every expenditure of power, but they did not stop. They burst through the final access hatch onto the command deck. The room was a wide, circular space, its outer wall a panoramic viewport showing the star-dusted void and the pockmarked surface of the moon. In the center, on a raised dais, sat Warden Valerius. He was not panicked. He watched their entrance on his monitors with a look of cold amusement, a king observing the final, futile struggles of rebellious peasants. Crix stood beside him, his leg in a hastily applied medical brace, his face a mask of pure hatred. A dozen elite enforcers formed a phalanx before the dais, their rifles leveled. "Impressive," Valerius said, his voice smooth and calm, echoing through the chamber's speakers. "You've caused me a great deal of trouble, handler. And for what? A rock? A pet? You've thrown your life away for sentiment." "You're right," Cale said, his voice raspy, his chest heaving. "It's not about my life anymore." A massive holographic display behind Valerius showed a countdown timer. 5 minutes until core sterilization. The warden gestured to the screen. "Checkmate. In 5 minutes, this entire facility, your pet rock, and all evidence of this little insurrection will be wiped clean. A tragic mining accident. The corporation is very understanding about such things when the paperwork is in order. Go," Cale said to Lyra, his voice low. "I'll hold them." She didn't need to be told twice. As Cale charged forward, she veered to the side, heading for the base of the command dais. Valerius's throne was built directly over the primary Nexus conduit, the point of maximum energy convergence. "Stop her," Valerius commanded, his calm facade finally cracking. "Kill them both." The enforcers opened fire. Cale became a dervish, using the steel pipe to deflect plasma bolts, the superheated energy scorching the metal. He wasn't trying to win. He was trying to buy time, to be the most immediate and dangerous threat. He crashed into the enforcer line, a wild, unpredictable force. Crix limped forward, drawing a vibroknife from his belt, its blade humming with deadly energy. "You're mine, traitor," he snarled, bypassing the larger melee to engage Cale directly. Their final battle was a brutal, ugly thing. Cale's pipe against Crix's knife. Steel against vibrating metal. It was a clash of desperation against obsession. While they fought, Lyra reached the dais. She placed her hands on the floor, and a wave of energy, her last reserve, surged into the station's systems. Lights flickered. The holographic countdown stuttered. Valerius drew a sleek plasma pistol from his coat. "Get away from there, you freak," he screamed, firing at her. The bolt struck her in the shoulder, shattering a piece of her crystalline form. She staggered but held her ground, her light flaring in agony and defiance. Seeing her hit, Cale found a new reserve of strength. He parried a vicious thrust from Crix and used the momentum to slam the heavy pipe into the side of Crix's head. The helmet cracked. Crix dropped to his knees, stunned. Kale didn't finish him. He turned and ran for the dais, for Lyra. The countdown timer reappeared, flickering, 30 seconds. He reached the dais just as Lyra channeled one final pulse of energy, causing the floor plates at the base of the warden's chair to retract, revealing the Nexus conduit. It was a shaft of pure darkness, a hole that seemed to drink the light, and from its depths came a low, terrible hum of unstable power. Kale, a voice whispered in his mind. It was her. The first and only time he would ever hear her name for him. It was a sound of farewell. He didn't hesitate. He met her unseen gaze one last time, a universe of understanding passing between them in that final second. Then he turned and jumped into the conduit. The fall was short. He landed on a crystalline interface, the heart of the machine built to control her people. He placed his hands flat against its cold surface. The pain was immediate and absolute. It was the feeling of every nerve ending being set on fire, of his atoms being pulled apart and reassembled. Raw, untamed energy flooded his body, his mind, his soul. He screamed, a sound that was swallowed by the roar of the moon's core. But through the agony came something else. Connection. He felt the entire moon, its deep, slow life, its pain, its history. He felt the consciousness of the Lumina, the sleeping survivors, stirring in the depths. He reached out with his mind, not with force, but with guidance, weaving the chaotic strands of energy into a coherent, stable pattern. He was no longer Kale, the man. He was a bridge, a regulator, a heart. On the command deck, a wave of pure, calming energy radiated outward from the conduit. It was not violent. It was a wave of profound peace. The shrieking alarms fell silent. The red alert lights shifted to a soft, steady blue. The countdown timer vanished. All the weapons in the room, from the Enforcer's rifles to Valerius's pistol, went dead, their power cells instantly and permanently drained. The sterilization was aborted. The war was over. Valerius stared, his face a mask of disbelief and horror, as shimmering forms of light began to coalesce in the air around Lyra. The Lumina, reconnected to their life source, were returning. The command center, once his seat of power, had become their sacred ground. His reign, in the dark chapter of Tartarus 7, had come to an end, not with a bang, but with a silent, inexorable tide of light. 10 years later, the world once known as Tartarus 7 was now called Lyra's Cradle. It was no longer a place of darkness and despair. The prison facility had been dismantled, its metal and plasteel recycled into the foundations of a new kind of settlement. The oppressive gray structures were gone, replaced by graceful towers that seemed to be grown from the moon's own crystal, glowing with a soft, internal light. The air was clean, carrying the faint, melodic hum of a world in harmony with itself. The former penal colony was now a joint sanctuary, a symbol of the new accord between the reformed corporation and the reawakened Lumina. Humans and Lumina lived and worked side by side, studying the unique geology and energy of the moon, a place of science and peace built on the ashes of a great crime. The change was so profound it was spoken of in hushed, reverent tones across the sector. An old, grizzled man stepped off the shuttle onto the main landing platform. It was Marcus Thorne, Kale's former superior, now a retired corporate inspector. He had been the one to sign Kale's transfer papers all those years ago, sending him to this hellhole. He had come back one last time, drawn by a need to see the legacy of the man he had barely known. Illumina, its form a graceful swirl of amber and gold light, greeted him. It communicated not with words, but with feelings of welcome and serene curiosity. Thorne, like most visitors, found the experience disorienting but deeply peaceful. He was guided through the settlement, past gardens where glowing flora grew in intricate patterns, towards the central spire. The spire was no longer a command center, but a temple. It was open to the sky, the panoramic viewport long since removed, allowing the natural, faint light of the system's star to filter in. The air was still and sacred. In the center of the chamber, where the warden's dais once stood, was the heart of this new world. It was a crystalline formation in the distinct shape of a seated man, his hands resting on his knees. The crystal was impossibly clear, and from its core, a steady, gentle, blue-white light pulsed with the slow, rhythmic beat of a sleeping heart. It was a light of immense peace, of silent, eternal vigilance. It was Kale. Lyra stood beside the formation, her own light brighter and more complex than Thorn remembered from the old security files. She was a queen now, a leader, her form radiating wisdom and a deep, abiding sorrow that had softened into memory. As Thorn approached, she turned her featureless face towards him. An image bloomed in his mind. Kale, in his simple, gray jumpsuit, adjusting the shackle on her wrist in the cold containment bay. A small, forbidden act of kindness. The seed from which this entire peaceful world had grown. Thorn stood before the crystal figure for a long time, his gaze fixed on the quiet light within. He remembered Kale as a disillusioned, solitary man, a burnout case just looking to run out the clock, a man who had nothing left to live for. He had been wrong. Kale had found the one thing worth dying for, and in doing so, had achieved a kind of immortality that transcended flesh and time. He was the guardian, the heart of the cradle, the silent sacrifice upon which a lasting peace was built. His name was not carved on any monument, but it was written in the light of every crystal, felt in the hum of the healed moon, and remembered in the silent gratitude of a people he had saved. His legacy was not in glory, but in the quiet, enduring peace that now reigned in the once dark corner of the void. And in the heart of that peace, the soft blue light continued its steady, unending pulse.